This scandal was like handing gasoline and matches to the radio talk shows all over the country. Is that correct?
Well, I really don't think it is in a sense. It gives us an issue, but I think the thing that needs to be said about that, Jim, is that radio talk show hosts and radio talk shows don't invent emotion. It was there. I mean, the public is angry as they can be about this, and there's one good reason for it. This is easy to understand. This is something they can't do. This is the epitome of arrogance. This is the epitome of condescension, and it just won't do, Congressman Fazio, to sit there and say that the people don't care about this, that they want you to sit there and do the work of the country. You haven't been doing the work of the country. When the work of the country gets done, it's by accident, not by design, and it always seems to be wrong, and it seems to be screwed up, and the people seem powerless to do anything about it. It takes a simple issue like this, where you guys can go in and float loans to yourself, interest-free. You sit there and say it's not taxpayer money. It is all taxpayer money. That's the point. You guys are our employees, and you treat people in the country like we are your employees and you're the boss. And it just won't do anymore. And I think that there's going to be much more of a change this fall than you or Speaker Foley seem to think. I think the people out there are genuinely upset about this, and this is the one issue that could be the one that causes a massive shift in seats.
Why this one? Why is this so important?
Because, Jim, this goes to the root of life. These are people who exempt themselves from laws they passed. These are people who tell us that the tax cuts we got in the 80s are responsible for the deficit. The deficit is the responsibility of the U.S. Congress. They spend the money. And they tell us that it's our fault because we got tax cuts that we didn't deserve, that the prosperity of the 80s was not justified and not warranted. And so here comes some people who say, we need a pay raise, we need a pay raise. They don't need a pay raise. They can go to the bank and get a pay raise anytime they want, interest-free, and they don't have to pay it back. And the problem here is that we found out about it. And the Democratic leadership in this Congress had no desire for any of this to happen. The thing to keep in mind is that none of this last night would have happened had not the Democratic leadership caved.
Norman Ornstein, is the outrage justified, in your opinion, at these 355 current and former members?
No, I don't think so, Jim. There clearly are some people who are miscreants in this process, and they ought to be bared for public consideration, and they're up every 2 years for a vote, and their constituents can decide. But having tried to douse the fire after handing the gasoline and the matches to Mr. Limbaugh, he said this is something that people find easy to understand. One of the reasons they find it easy to understand is that it is grossly oversimplified and distorted, not just by radio talk show hosts. It's been true of the press from the beginning. Most of the stories here say that it is a bank. Basically, people think it's a bank just like every other. People think that it is directly the taxpayers' money at stake. For these people, this great perk, I, as a private citizen, have a now account in a bank, and my paycheck gets electronically deposited immediately there where it immediately begins earning interest. I've got overdraft protection, as a lot of people do. If I go over, I pay a small fee. I earn far more in interest. I have FDIC insurance protection. This was a depository. It had been set up in 1830 originally. It did not have any FDIC protection. It involved, the only money that was there was the money that had come from the paychecks of the members of Congress. The floats were floats that people in Congress were using from their own colleagues' money. They did not earn interest on their money. It would go into this account and would sit there not earning interest, often for weeks at a time. They basically got screwed in this process by sloppy management.
If it was such a bad deal, Norm, why did they do it?
If you came into the Congress, basically what you were told, even though it wasn't entirely accurate, was this is the way we do things. It's the same as if you came to work for the public television station and they said, we don't do direct deposit of paychecks. We've got our own depository here and the money goes there and this is the way it works. And most people just did that. They are, in fact, innocent victims for the most part, and it's a much more complicated issue even than that. We talk about checks being bounced for $10,000. What if you bounce a check where you write one for $10,000, say for a mortgage payment or to put in another account, and in fact you had $9,990 in the bank? Another time you write a check for $10 and you've got zero in the bank. They're the same at one level. At another level, obviously, the way this information is going to come out, you will look like the biggest bozo in the world or deadbeat in the world because you bounced the check for $10,000. Many people, because you had a system that had statements that were far less sophisticated and timely than you have in a regular bank, unknowingly made errors here. We may have 24, we may have 55 or 60 who use this system, some cynically for their own advantage, let the voters decide on them. Others are going to get caught up in this wash because basically a lot of press people see this is a great story. Why should we let shades of gray and facts get in the way? And what concerns me the most, frankly, is not just the current members. They're big boys and girls. They can take care of themselves. They'll get out there and they'll make their case one way or the other. What concerns me is that this is part of a pattern where scandal becomes the news no matter what. It gets hyped no matter what. In some cases it's real. In some cases it's hyped beyond belief. It's distorted beyond belief. Who in his or her right mind is going to run for office under these circumstances? We're going to get demagogues. We're going to get multimillionaires.
Don't say that.
And we're going to get the Mother Teresas of the world, if we can find any. And when they come to Congress, we'll find a scandal manufactured for them.
Mr. Limbaugh, I think
Mr. Ornstein, with all due respect, you are a brilliant political scientist, but all of that is irrelevant. We are talking about an attitude that is exhibited by these members. Who cares if it wasn't really a bank, if you want to get technical that way? There are so many questions. You're talking about $10,000, $20,000. Where do people making 100 and some odd thousand, taking home 75, get the money to repay these loans? Where is the IRS and their concerns in any of this? I mean, there's far more here than just a minor little scandal. And if you want to talk about scandals, the Democrats live off of them. The Democrats can't win the White House without them. Here's Tom Foley, who says we're going to have to inspect the October surprise, whether Reagan and Casey made a deal with the Iranians on hostages, because we have no evidence. And because we have no evidence, we've got to look into it. And this is a bipartisan business, this scandal stuff. But this whole line from Mr. Ornstein misses the point that it's attitudinal, Jim.
All right, let me ask you this question, Mr. Limbaugh. Do you have any sympathy at all for any of the members of Congress who might be involved in this, as outlined by Norm Ornstein, that somebody might have made one inadvertent mistake or two or three inadvertent mistakes? Are you concerned that they might also get it in the neck?
Somewhat, but I think that what really is needed here is a total reform of the way the House does business. The very fact that this bank, which was set up to cover first month's expenses after you won elections 150 years ago, had evolved to the point that it got to last night, is a sure sign that the whole thing is a mess and needs to be reformed, and sometimes a total sweep is what's necessary.
Norm, what about that point? I mean, the point that Mr. Limbaugh is making there is that it's all well and good to say these individuals may not be as guilty as other individuals, et cetera, but isn't that a kind of a lousy way to run a railroad up there?
It absolutely is, and some change has occurred. The bank has been closed. It should have been closed a long time ago. They should have put in a commercial bank with money machines and all the rest of it, and I'm sure we'll move in that direction. And we need serious administrative reform. And I think now we're going to get some. It should have happened a long time ago. They ought to be criticized for it. And frankly, I think we also need some reform in the ethics process, because Congress is given the constitutional responsibility to police itself, and it has to take that responsibility seriously in terms of ultimate decisions. I don't think we can go any longer with having current members make these decisions because they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. We need a central House administrator who is a professional person like a city manager. We have something that's not quite comparable to that in the White House, which is a fairly recent innovation, and they ought to do it in the Congress as well. And I think we're being pushed very strongly in that direction. It's overdue. We need to take a look at other aspects of the institution. But that is one element here, clearly ought to be done. Maybe the scandal adds some additional pressure to do that. But frankly, we're focusing not so much on that. That's an afterthought now. It's the feeding frenzy that we've seen come up. And frankly, it's not just partisan. I felt the same way about the John Tower business. I think we've hyped the October surprise beyond belief. We're into scandal everywhere now, and it is corrosive in the system, not because it's taking place. Frankly, it's there. It's always been there to some degree in politics. Most every historian would tell you that there's less of it now than there was 50 years ago, but we are ignoring a lot of other things, and we're not going to get good people to serve.
Raj, how do you respond to that?
I don't think that any of that has anything to do with whether or not we're going to get good people to serve. Just because you can't go cash a check for money you don't have at a bank means that people aren't going to run for Congress to be elected. I think that is a straw dog that is thrown out, although we're not going to get good people. I would say we don't have good people now on balance. Nothing is getting done. Well, this government is in gridlock and has been since Ronald Reagan won the White House, because members of Congress, the leadership of the Democratic side, don't want any political victory or legislative victory by the White House, so everything gets stonewalled. We don't have any leadership going on in the country right now, I think, on balance, and that's one of the reasons we have these problems.
Is that one of the reasons we have with these problems, Congressman Fazio?
Well, I think the country has been in political gridlock, and I think one of the things you're seeing in 1992 is the feeling that we're now moving to change. We're going to have a significant election for president this year. The issue is in doubt, and Congress is attempting to stand firmly on principle, and that's one of the reasons it's hard to get, for example, a tax bill through that this president will sign, because he's unwilling to raise taxes on upper income people like Rush Limbaugh. But that doesn't